mom tries to go to the bathroom, and as soon as she opens the door, she like screams my dad's name at the top of her lungs. And it was one of those screams, I'm sure you've been around or heard it where like, something's just like very wrong.
All right, guys. So today we're going to have a conversation with a tribesman out of Front Royal, Virginia. We've got Isaiah Tank Baker here. Tank, thanks for being on the podcast, bro.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Goose.
Revenant tribe, right?
Yes, sir. Out in Front Royal, Virginia.
Man, that's awesome. How long have you been doing MA?
Since June. Actually, getting me started took quite the effort from a fellow tribesman at the Hills Tribe.
Oh, really?
Call sign Smokey. He invited me quite a few times to the Hills Tribe out there on Friday mornings, and I just couldn't make it because of work. And I was like, giving him that, oh man, it sounds really cool, but like I can't make it because of work. And then boom, Revenant Tribe popped, and I've been going since June. It's been
it's been
That's
awesome. So how'd you get the call sign Tank?
That was a funny story. I was working out. It was a very, very, very hot Saturday morning when we were doing our MA meeting. And afterwards, I get weird. Like if I have a good workout, I'll want to see how far I can take it. And so I got home and I was like, man, I think I'm going to go on a run. Like my wife had my son at the library or something. And I was like, I'm going to go on a run. It's like 100 degrees out. And one of the dudes who was at the MA tribe, his call sign's Leo, he was grabbing coffee down the road and he saw me running around town in Front Royal. And he's like, we got to keep an eye on this dude. He ain't right.
This was after an MA workout.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I just got out and about, and it ended up being not such a good idea. It didn't feel too hot afterwards, but I was feeling it when I started. So
nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome. How old are you?
I'm 29.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Enjoy it.
Yeah, I feel it creeping now. I just went and did a ruck with another tribesman, Smokey, who got me out. Been doing rucks with him the past week, and when I was in the Army, I could go ruck with a 45-pound saddle and not worry about it whatsoever. I could ruck for miles and miles and miles, come back and feel okay. We did, I think, 3 miles with some push-ups and squats.
Yeah.
And I got home and I was texting him. I'm like, dude, my knees ain't right. I don't know what's up.
Yeah.
I don't feel too good. So
rucking is one of those things for me where if you don't do it for a while, you lose your rucking endurance really quick, like in your neck and shoulders.
Absolutely.
And like your first time back rucking, if you haven't rucked in a while, like about 3 miles in, you start getting this headache from all the pressure on your shoulders.
Yeah.
But then if you go again the next day, you can go farther before the headache sets in. And then the next day you go even further before the headache. But, so it's like every time you train for a ruck, you're pushing the headache further in front of you down the trail is what I feel like.
Right. Yeah. For me too, I had a vest on that I usually do like weighted runs with, and it's about 25 pounds. And I have an aid bag that I had because I was a medic in the military, and that was like a going away gift that they got me on my way out. And put my vest on and I'm putting my bag on, and Smokey looks at me. He's like, you haven't done this in a while. You're adding extra weight. And I was like, yeah, man, why not? And I decided to throw my boots on that I haven't worn since I got out of the military. And I was like, I'm going to ruck on asphalt with these boots that I haven't worn in forever instead of my running shoes, which are very broken in. Man, when I say my shins were so sore, I was having trouble walking around and playing with my son for like 4 days after the ruck. It was a doozy.
Yeah, well, that seems to be kind of like a common thing with tribesmen in Men's Alliance is we've all got a little bit of that personality that would kind of rather do the hardest thing we can find than sit and watch, college football.
Absolutely.
So you were in the Army. How long, and where all were you stationed?
I did one contract. I started off at Fort Sill doing my basic training and bounced down to San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and then got stationed at Fort Carson and
Where's
met
Fort Carson?
Colorado Springs.
Okay.
Yep. I met my wife promptly after getting stationed out there too. Pretty funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you were a medic, and tell us a little bit of your story, Tank. Take us back to, as far back as you want to go, because I know you've got an incredible story that our listeners want to hear. And so tell us where'd you start? How'd you go? And how'd you end up in the Army?
Absolutely. So I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I'm going this far back because it's kind of started off on a funny note. My mom was like 36 weeks pregnant with me, and she was going to a relative's house in Pennsylvania as like a little trip, and went into labor while she was in Pennsylvania. She didn't want to have me up there at all. Tried to like gun it back to Virginia, but I ended up being born in Pennsylvania anyways. So after they got back, got situated, we did a good bit of moving around as I was a young child, bouncing around due to financial issues and stuff like that. Once I started school, we moved around. I moved a good bit in elementary school as well. I think I went to 4 different elementary schools, all within the area. And same thing, just due to like financial issues and stuff, which my parents were super transparent about. So the moving didn't necessarily bother me. Like I wasn't like, losing friends or anything like that. It was more of a, oh, here we go again kind of thing. Middle school is when I started to, I guess, do a lot more exploring than I should have done as far as like being a kid, because there wasn't a ton of guidance in my household growing up. There was no going to church. There was no church attendance whatsoever. Not Easter, not a before Christmas service, nothing of the sort.
Not even Christmas and Easter, huh?
No, well, nothing. Not, yeah. And that, I think I went maybe 2 times growing up. And that was like more of a, I don't want to say a babysitting thing, but it was more of like schedules weren't aligning properly. And my grandpa was going to church, and I just went to church with him. And didn't get anything out of it necessarily, because I was a very rambunctious little child. And the church that he took me to was a very quiet, mellow, the pastor speaking, everyone is not making a peep kind of church, which didn't really go well for me. Let me preface this all by saying my mom got pregnant with me when she was 15. And so had me when she was 16, had my brother when she was 18, the older of my 2 sisters when she was 20, and then the youngest of us when she was 22. So from a very young age, my mom was like very tied up, if you will. So she had me, and she was going to school and working jobs and stuff like that. So the guidance from her end was going to be probably few and far between, if she had the chance, between everything that she had going on. And my biological father was out of the picture like very early. So I can't remember exactly when he went to prison, but he went to prison at a very young age. And then he would get out. He got out, rather. And then my mom had my brother. He was in and out of jail. She ended up having my sister. And after my sister was born, kind of cut ties, as she should have. It was not going the way that she had hoped. God bless her for even trying that long and, giving him the benefit of the doubt for that long. But my stepdad, who raised me from 5 years old on, came into the picture, and he came into the picture when my mom already had 3 children My mom was 21 years old. Like I just said this last night, and it kind of took me back a little bit. My mom wasn't even she had just turned 21 years old the year I was starting kindergarten.
Wow.
She couldn't even buy alcohol for herself when I was starting kindergarten. So my dad came into the picture with all of this stuff going on. They're like three little kids. It's not like we're already grown and groomed into, who we're supposed to be by any stretch of the imagination. He had to come into the picture and, teach us everything.
Yeah.
Everything. So
you and your mom kind of grew up together.
Yeah. And this is something that I was going to say towards the end, but yeah, that's a big reason, like a lot of the stuff that I've experienced and a lot of the stuff that I've dealt with, like, with my mom a lot of it was because, my mom didn't really have teenage years. She didn't have a young adulthood, and, she raised us to the best of her capabilities 100%. It's just, it's very difficult to grow with your kids at the same time. Like you just said, there's going to be things that don't get touched on or don't get explained properly, because to be quite frank, if I had a child at 16 years old, knowing myself at 16 years old, it would have been an absolute disaster. So props to her and doing her thing.
So when your dad was these years where he was in and out of jail, do you have any memories of that, or is that just kind of you were too young?
I remember visiting him so my mom and my stepdad had already been together for a year and some change, and my grandma, my mom's mother, would try and take me here and there to visit my biological father in prison. And I remember I was 6 years old the last time I went to visit him in prison. And don't ask me how the visit was this long, but he taught me how to play chess. And that's the only thing I really remember sharing with my biological father. I don't remember any experience with him.
Yeah.
Other than that one visit where he taught me how to play chess. So.
Did you ever see him again or have any relationship with him when you got older?
No, I didn't pursue that relationship because of the things that I knew about him. I didn't want to put myself in a position where I was making it seem like I wanted him more than I wanted my stepdad in my life.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he and my stepdad didn't have the best of relationships, and my mother didn't have the best of relationships with him. So I was like, to respect mom and dad, I'm not going to pursue this relationship with someone who had the chance and didn't take advantage of the chance that he was given.
No, that makes sense. So how old were you when your mom got remarried?
It took my stepdad forever to propose and get married. I don't know what it was. It was, let me see. Shame on me. I know they got married on Valentine's Day, and I would say I was 13 or 12 or 13.
Okay.
So it took a while for him to propose and then to get married.
And was he a pretty good guy? Did you like him?
Yeah, great guy as far as, teaching me the ropes, if you will,
Yeah.
Obviously, I think guiding me in a different direction may have been beneficial, but as far as his character and whatnot, I think he was, just think about what kind of person it takes to come into someone else's life who already has 3 children, and instead of boot scooting boogieing, he locks in and does everything he needs to do to take care of us, and then ends up having another child with my mother and took care of all of us without a glimmer of a thought. There was never once that I had a conversation with him where I was like, oh man, he's teetering on the fence, or I never felt like he was on his way out. Every time I talked to him, I could tell like he was there to stay, and he, he loved us.
So tell me more about how did that go with him and your mom? So
when the relationship was still young, they, it seemed like they got along really well, like really well. And I mean, they were crazy young when they met. And so like 21 years old, he was 20, a year younger than my mom. So a lot of laughs, a lot of smiles, it seemed really nice. It was nice being around them. And we all had such a good relationship that when we would go to like family gatherings and stuff, it would still just be us. It'd be like my mom, my dad, and then the little kiddos running around, goofing around with my dad. Because he taught me how to play football and would always want to throw the football with me, play football with me and stuff like that. So it was really nice. And there was a lot of opportunity to share, some smiles and jokes and whatnot. We didn't really have any issues per se until I started to get a little bit older, around like 14 years old. I'd say my freshman year of high school, or 13 rather, eighth grade is when I started to fly off the deep end a little bit. And I think part of that was because we grew up in an environment. My mom, I actually just called her last night to talk about this, because I was like, hey, I want to, I'm going on this podcast, but I also like want to honor you and everything that I say. And I don't want to hurt your feelings or, talking about anything.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And she's my mom's a stud, as it takes to raise my brother and I at such a young age. She was like, dude, it's your life too. Go talk, go explain things. So I just wanted to get that out there too.
That's cool.
Yeah. My mom's a rock star. So we grew up in an environment where drugs and alcohol and adulterous actions and stuff like that it was almost normal. It was commonplace for sure. Dealt with it pretty consistently, at least exposure to it. So once I got a little bit of freedom, I started skateboarding and made friends with some people who probably shouldn't have been engaging in activity with whatsoever, but started drinking and smoking and stuff when I was like 8th grade. I would be like drinking before I would go to school, and it was obvious, it's not like a secret or anything, but yeah, that type of guidance that I was talking about earlier, there was no like sit down moments where you like, where my dad sat me down and he was like, hey dude, this is stupid. Like you should not be doing these things whatsoever, because he was young and I'm sure he was engaging in the same exact type of stuff, so I don't know whether he felt like he was in the wrong if he would sit me down and say something to me. But this carried on for probably a solid 2 years. It took a while, but I had a wrestling coach in high school who was my history teacher, who kind of, I'll say, took me under his wing, which sounds odd because I didn't really talk to him after he got me started wrestling. But he's like, hey man, you skateboard, you probably have good balance. You seem like a good guy, but I can tell you're getting into a little bit of trouble. You're not doing things the way you should be doing things. He's like, why don't you come out and wrestle and see how you like that? And then the first week was miserable, but I think it took a week for me to get really hooked up with like the team and everything, the wrestling coach, and all of that kind of acting out of character flew right out the window when I was wrestling. Up until my junior year, I made varsity and ended up going to states and stuff like that. And so I started partying a little more, thinking I was like the cool guy on campus, going out and doing stuff that I shouldn't have been doing. And that definitely continued up through college and even like throughout the military career. So that's something that I struggled with that up until really 2022, early 2022. So this is fast forwarding like crazy, but yeah, that the drug and alcohol scene was very much so common in my life. And that eventually led up to me being in college. So I got some money to go wrestle at West Liberty University and ended up going up there. And I remember one of the coaches saying, he would joke about it, and he'd say, wrestling second, school first. And he would always do that. And he's like, we're going to practice and practice and practice. And that's all I didn't really enjoy school. So I was like, I'm going to college to wrestle.
Right.
Not partake in classes whatsoever. Yeah. So I was on academic probation very quickly. It took 1 year and got sent back home, and I was taking classes at a community college trying to get off of academic probation, because if you're there on scholarships, they give you, and don't quote me, it's a semester or a full year to get off of academic probation, get back in good standing. And so that's what I was doing. I was at home taking classes at a community college right down the road, trying to get everything right. And I was working at Sears, doing stocking shelves and whatnot while I was going to school. And that was 2014. And then in October and stop me if I'm moving too quick. I know I'm rambling.
Not at all.
All right.
No. I'm hooked.
All right, we're getting to the meat and taters now, as I always say. So we running into 2014. I take the summer off and I start classes in September. And my dad was kind of the only person who was all for me going to school and wrestling. He wanted me to join the Army way earlier on. He wanted me to join the Army because his dream for me, whether or not he was living vicariously through that or attempting to, I have no idea. But he's like, I think you should be like an Army Ranger. I think that would be really cool. And so I kind of sat on that idea of joining the military or going to college. And I let my mother and a girl that I was dating at the time sway me to go wrestle in college instead of joining the military. So fast forward to where I started school. He was the only one who was helping me pay for school. So he helps me make my first payment in September. And October 5th, he and my mom were at ends with each other. They were arguing a lot. They weren't on the best of terms. So we ended up going to my grandmother's house for like a little bonfire, little party that she was having. And he was like, I'm not going to go with you guys. I'm going to go to this party that these guys from work invited me to. And I knew it was just a weird situation to begin with. I was like, I know you guys are fighting, but you sure you don't want to just come out here with us, And we're out there hooting and hollering. It's not like it was any different than where he was at. But we were up at my grandma's house at like 1:45 in the morning. Grandma was fed up, to say the least. So grandma at that point was like, you guys need to leave like now. So we end up get 86 from my grandmother's house because we're too intoxicated to act right. And as we're getting ready to leave, my dad texts me this like really goofy, like the letter, like the wording didn't make sense. Nothing in the text message made sense. When this is like 1:47 a.m. Nothing made sense whatsoever. And they sent me a video where everything's like super, super blurry. And I was like texting him throughout the night. So I noticed the shift in his level of coherence, like throughout the night.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got that text message and I was like, man, that is like so weird. Then I was thinking about it the whole way home. And when we get home, it's me and about six of my friends and my brother. My mom was there as well. I like start motioning towards my door, my room, and my mom tries to go to the bathroom. And as soon as she opens the door, she like screams my dad's name at the top of her lungs. And it was one of those screams, you know, I'm sure you've been around or heard it where like, you know, something's like very wrong. And our bathroom door was the top hinge was broken. So I like walk over and I try and shove it open, doesn't move. So I just yank the bad boy right off of the bottom hinge and like slide the door to the side. And we ended up, my dad was laying there. We found him laying there on the ground after he had overdosed. And so I like pull him out into the hallway, like throw the needle in the sink, and I start, you know, trying to resuscitate him. I'm giving him mouth to mouth and giving him chest compressions. And I've got like one buddy who kind of snapped into action. I guess he realized the severity of the situation. And he's like holding my dad's head while I'm, you know, going from like rescue breaths to chest compressions. And it's just a room full of people. It's like 6 people in the room looking. And I'm like frantic, screaming, you know, and my dad was like aspirating. So he was like spitting up puke, and we were like turning his head, scooping the puke out and, you know, doing whatever we can. And someone eventually ended up calling an ambulance, and I just sat there. We kept going and going and going, and took the ambulance a considerable amount of time to get there. So throughout this entire time, everyone in the room, I didn't hear a peep. There was nothing going on other than my dad, my friend, and I right then and there. And then my brother, once he realized what was going on, started to get a little frantic as well. And so they arrived at the house, kind of yanked me off of my dad. I have some words with the paramedic, and they take him out on the stretcher. And something really bizarre happened to me where I went bonkers for a little bit. I started like smashing stuff in the house, like punching holes and stuff, which was, I have no idea why. Did not fix anything. But I went and put on a bunch of stuff that reminded me of my dad. So I like put on my wrestling shoes from high school, and I put on like this big sideline jacket that he used to wear. And then I grabbed a devotional that I had. Because I wouldn't consider myself a believer at this point, but I was definitely reading the Bible whenever I got the chance. And I had a devotional that a wrestling coach had sent me when I was wrestling in college, which is another crazy story that I can dive into later on. But I grabbed that devotion, and I'm like running out the door. My buddy's driving me to the hospital. So we get to the hospital, and I'm like pacing back and forth between the front desk and the waiting room. You know, people are pouring in, and I'm like, hey, where's my dad? Hey, where's my dad? And the young lady up at the front, after about the third time, she was like, don't worry, your dad's okay. He's coming in now. And I don't think she understood the situation outside in the ambulance. So her saying that to me triggered a response in my mind where I was like, oh, he's alive, you know?
Yeah.
I thought, I was like, oh my goodness. So I turn around and I'm like, she said he's okay. Right. Because I didn't make the connection. Like, I'm talking to this lady. I never once see her engage with anyone from the ambulance. So I didn't make that connection in my mind at that point in time. So I was like, oh, dude, he's alive. We're golden. And as soon as I see the doctor come out, I'm like, I already knew exactly what he was going to say. So he kind of breaks down what happened for us. And yeah, my biological father was out of prison at this time, showed up that night at the hospital, or that morning rather. Yeah. And despite the relationship he had with my dad at the time, and, really weird. And maybe it was not the nicest thing of me to say, but I was like, I don't know why you're here. I just don't understand it. And I felt I felt so much resentment in my heart at that particular point in time. Kind of brushed it off to the side, and I was, kind of going a little crazy after I figured out that he was actually dead, and so I took that devotion and I ran to the room where they were trying to resuscitate him. And I just sat at the foot of the bed, and I was reading from the devotion, all of the devotions that had verses from the book of John listed at the bottom. And I was just going through. And didn't know why I was doing it at that point. Because like I said, I wasn't going to church. I wasn't living a life befitting a Christian man by any means, but it was weird. It was I felt a crazy sense of peace in that moment, and it calmed my mind enough to go outside, and we had to drive to my grandmother's house where my sisters were staying, because it was it was a family get together at my grandmother's house. So we had to drive back out there, and my little sisters were sleeping downstairs in the basement. So they had no idea what was going on. And somehow, some way, the responsibility fell on me to go wake them up and tell them everything that had just happened. So, yeah, I was 19 at the time, and I had to go downstairs in the basement, wake my little sisters up, and explain to them that their dad had just passed away.
About how old were they?
Oh, man. So brother would have been 15 and 13.
Okay.
So definitely old enough to realize what was going on. There was no way to sugarcoat it any way, shape, or form. So yeah, that was a giant turning point in my life. I fell pretty deep into, just drinking all the time. I mean, all the time. And right after he passed away, I ended up, I totaled a car. I rolled the car into the woods going back to my grandmother's house. So I woke my sister up, and I was like, hey, why are you not in school? She's like, oh, I slept in. I was like, get your butt up. I'm taking you to school. So I drive her down to the school. And on the way back, I ended up flipping the car. And so I got stuck up at my grandmother's house. Since I couldn't make it to and from classes, I got dropped from my classes at the community college. And probably 2 weeks or a week and a half after I get dropped from my classes at the community college, I get a call from my wrestling coach. And he's like, hey, dude, I know you have some things going on, but since you're no longer in school, we have to revoke the scholarships and this, that, and the third. So all this stuff was happening like crazy. And the girl that I was dating at that time, or that I was talking to at that time, her and I had officially called it quits that week. Her coming up from her school was her doing a good gesture, being there for me. And then it was hey, we're not talking to each other anymore. So all these things start happening.
Jeez.
At a cyclic rate.
Piling up.
Yeah. And I had a couple of good friends who were there for me at the time. and it turned into one of those things where I clung pretty heavily to them. We were, like I said, I particularly was drinking 100% to like run and like drown out the pain that I was trying not to deal with.
Yeah.
And it ended up going on for months and months and months until I ended up switching jobs, and I was able to, because at that time, me, my brother, and my two sisters were all living in different places. So I ended up getting a decent job, and we ended up putting together enough money to rent the place out. And we ended up renting a place for my brother, my two sisters, my mom, and I. And at that point in time, I thought it was going to be something that we needed and that we 100% should have done. But what it ended up turning out to be was like my brother, my mom, and I had all internalized the grief that we were feeling from my dad passing away. And we hadn't gotten a chance to really express that or talk about that or deal with it in any way, shape, or form. So we all get this house, and it's like the three of us. It's like the Wild West in the house, you know, like where everyone's drinking, everyone's drunk all the time. There's always people at the house. There's always partying and stuff going on. And, you know, we had some serious stuff going on with like my mom, you know, where we had to, you know, get my mom medical attention and get her situated. My brother and I were just blacking out all the time, like passing out like in the front yard. It was a horrible sight. And that house we ended up getting evicted from. My mom moved with my little sisters, and my brother and I kind of went our separate ways. And this is another big turning point in my life. I have a really, well, two good friends, Kyle and Keith. They're both brothers, and their dad, I call him my Uncle Marty, and his wife, Aunt Heidi, kind of took me under their wing, let me stay at their house, didn't charge me rent, they fed me, they made sure I had the gym membership and all that other stuff. If I needed money, they would have given it to me. Thankfully, I never had to ask them for money or anything. But Uncle Marty's big thing was like, hey, you're not just going to stay here at my house and not do anything. You're going to at least make some sort of motion in the right direction. You're going to go to school, or you're going to join the military, or you're going to find a decent job and make whatever ends meet. You got to make meet.
Man, are you in the market to buy, build, or refinance a home? If so, you got to contact Chris Norwood, call sign Coop. He's with Town Bank Mortgage, and he's been doing this for over 22 years. He's licensed in 16 states, and he can absolutely help you get the house that you need to get. Contact Coop at Town Bank Mortgage. You can contact Coop at 804-439-3206. That's 804-439-3206.
And I was like, well, there's no way I'm going back to school. I've already biffed that 2 times in the past 365 days. So school was kind of not something I wanted to get back into. And so I sat on the job thing for a little while, and it took probably 6 months or so. And I went and swore in to the United States Army in September of 2016. And it was one of those things where I didn't even tell anyone that I was going. I didn't say anything when I was talking to recruiters. I didn't want to give anyone the chance to like keep me in Manassas, Virginia. I was like, I want out of here, you know, because I'm waking up every single morning after like nights of partying and doing who knows what. And every single time I wake up, I'm like, this is so stupid. Like I'm doing this to myself consistently. And I feel the same when I wake up. So I'm not fixing anything. So like,
you could recognize that you wanted out of this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Very, very soon after.
Would you say it was like the environment you were living in was keeping you in it?
Absolutely.
Like, could you not get sober? You know, like people, like I hear people talk about, like, I can't get clean if I'm living in this place. Was that you?
Yeah, and it's like I said, it started at a very young age. Like drinking and stuff like that wasn't talked about as a problem.
Yeah.
It was talked about as a way to have fun, So I'm going through all this, I'm like trying to fill that void with that my dad passing away left in my heart. I'm trying to fill it with drugs and alcohol and chasing girls around and working out, which obviously the first three kind of counteract that last one. So the working out wasn't really saving me in any way. It wasn't helping me focus. It wasn't helping me do anything. It was more of a ticket for me to be like, oh, I did something good today. So I'm going to go get blasted with me and a couple of my buddies and act a fool. And yeah, every day I would wake up and I'm like, why do you do this to yourself? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And that's kind of what led me to go talk to the recruiter without telling anyone what I was doing. I was like, I'm not going to give anyone the chance, because once I swear in, I'm locked in. So I was like, I'll go talk to the recruiter. And I mean, the first time I talked to the recruiter, I was buzzed. And I was like, hey, man, get me out of here. It's like, please. And that recruiter dragged his feet like crazy. So I ended up switching recruiters to one in Fairfax, Virginia. And I linked up with him and I was like, how fast can I leave? He's like, I can get you out of here November. I was like, when can I swear in? He said, well, we can swear you in September. We'll send you to MEPS, blah, 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 blah. And ended up going to take my ASVAB and stuff like that at MEPS. I think I did the one day. Yeah, it was a 1 day MEPS thing, which was a horrible idea because you take the ASVAB and then like that personality test and everything all within like the same couple hours. And it ended up being crazy. But yeah, I wanted to be a counterintelligence specialist when I was going in. So my Uncle Marty, that's kind of what he did. And I was like, I want to kind of follow in his footsteps. So that was the goal. I was going to be human intelligence, and I had it all planned out. I'm going to be human intelligence, and then I'm going to go counter intel after I become an E4 or a sergeant, whatever the rank requirement was. And I go to MEPS, and they're like, hey, man, you did outstanding on your ASVAB, but you have this underage possession of alcohol charge from Radford County. This kind of like disqualifies you. So I'm like, all right, well, what's next? So I pick geospatial intelligence, and I go find out that I have like a wicked color vision deficiency. And so I wasn't able to do geospatial intelligence. So I showed up at MEPS with this grand plan in mind, and they're like, hey, you're colorblind and you're a troubled child. Like, you're not going to be intelligence whatsoever. So they kind of sit me in a little cubicle, and they're like, okay, we got these jobs for you. And it was like cannon crew member and a couple other things. And I was like, hey, I made it very clear to my recruiter, and I'll state this now, I don't want to be anywhere near the infantry. Because I was like working out and running and doing stuff like that all the time. So I was like, I don't want someone to force me to do that all the time. Right. It wasn't my interest. And then, some words were exchanged, and they brought a book out. They were like, pick from these jobs. And I was like, oh, I'll be a medic. And it took like no time whatsoever. It's like, oh, I'll be a medic. And they're like, cool. So in peacetime, you're not really going to be a combat medic. You won't be with the infantry or anything. Man, sure enough, my first duty station right out of AIT was 4th Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, and 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson. So, yeah, it was very interesting to see how that series of events led to me being at Fort Carson and of meeting my wife like immediately after I got there.
Wow. You said when you were talking about that moment where you were trying to revive your stepdad and doing CPR, and you said he was aspirating, right? It was like instantly I saw the medic in you coming out.
Yeah.
I was like, I would have never known to call it that. And I think there's like this connection. I wonder if you were somehow drawn to that career field.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly. And it was a weird weird connection that I had with a bunch of people that I didn't even know yet. It's the best way I can put it, because I was like, I don't want anyone to ever, like, I don't care what my relationship is with anyone. I don't want anyone to ever experience what I had to experience that night. So I was like, being a medic will at least afford me the opportunity to be the light at the end of the tunnel, if that is like a situation that I'm placed in. So that was definitely it. And that's why, you know, when I went to Afghanistan in 2018, and I never had anything happen, nothing crazy. I mean, maybe some like mortar stuff, like kind of close, not close enough to like have anyone freaking out or anyone hurt, you know, but I never had to work on anyone. And, you know, those kind of things, like, you know, your combat badges and whatnot are really, it's fantastic. And I think it's a show of like, you had the gall to be there and do your thing. But I never wanted a combat medic badge. I'm like, why would I want to work on you guys? You know,
Right.
I love you guys. I even if I can't stand you at times, I love you guys. I don't want to be over here, you know, cutting your chest open or doing anything like that to you. I'd rather us all make it back A-okay. And praise God, that's what ended up happening. So,
Man, how about that?
yeah.
So when did your relationship with Christ really start changing your direction?
2022, 100%. We moved. So 2021, we were in Northern Arizona, Flagstaff. I was going to school out there for the nursing program. I was in the nursing program. Broke as all get out, and at the end of the lease, the apartment complex like slid a note under the door, and they're like, "Hey, we're skyrocketing rent." And I was like, "We can't live here anymore. We're paying rent with the GI Bill," because I wasn't working at the time. I was getting the GI Bill and going to school. And I had a really good buddy down there in Texas, and my buddy Keith that I just mentioned a little bit ago. I was like, let's try Texas. And my wife's like, why? Well, what's down there? And I was like, well, I have a friend down there. And so we ended up and moving to Texas and kind of financially biting ourselves and everything to get down there. And we're really weird. As soon as we got down there, I switched from the nursing program to IT. I got a little job to hold me over until I did the vet tech program. And while we're going through all of these crazy changes, my wife one day was like, I think we should go back to church. Or she said, I think we should go to church. Excuse me, because I was not going to church before. It's like, I think we should go to church. And I was like, nah. And I fought her on it a little bit. I was like, there's no way I'm like, I have tattoos all over my arms. And I'm like, there's no possible way I'm going to walk in there and they're going to greet me with like open arms. I was like, I'm going to be the most unwelcomed person in that building, you know, because I had this conception that everyone that went to church was perfect and that no one had done the things that I did and they would look at me weird. And we ended up going to Freedom Church in Round Rock, Texas. And when I say absolutely life-changing, it was, I mean, almost instantly. I walk in and I'm like trying to beeline towards the little kiosk to sign my son in to the daycare. And this, I can't remember what his position at the church was, but rather buff individual comes up, like slaps me on the shoulder. He's like, I haven't seen you here, man. How you doing? And like that small interaction right there kind of set the tone for the next couple of weeks that we were going to church. And the pastor was like extremely passionate and extremely like welcoming too. Like the pastor would come up and talk to us and stuff. And I was like, this isn't at all what I thought it would be, you know? And then I was like, well, let me get into this a little further. And I, you know, started cracking up in my word all the time. And I'm like, just searching, you know, I'm not necessarily, I wouldn't say 100% locked in at this point in time, but I'm like, just trying to figure some things out. And I think that small little period of time, we were only in Texas for 6 months, you know, and we didn't go to Freedom Church for, I think, 2 months of us being there. So within 4 months, I had, like, I still get newsletters and stuff and look at and watch like Freedom Church's stuff online sometimes, because I'm like, God was working he was working in my life at a point where I wasn't even fully aware that he was working.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's how it always is. And then we look back on it. It could be that the entire reason God put you in Texas was to have you in that church on that day.
Yeah. And
that guy,
my wife and I, we talk about that all the time, because we've since moved to Virginia, got relocated because of work and everything. But we found another fantastic church. Started going to Virginia Hills Church, and it's the same kind of vibe as Freedom Church down in Round Rock, Texas. And it's like, when I was starting to go to church in Round Rock, Texas, we had explored the idea of me applying to a company up here that would relocate us and stuff, because neither of us were particularly fond of Texas. And, we go on our honeymoon. Right before we leave for our honeymoon, I like look at Taylor and I'm like, hey, what do you think about me applying? And she's like, well, let's just pray about it. And you apply. She's like, we won't set any expectations. We won't think about it, And we did just that. We prayed about it, and I applied to the job. And while we're on our honeymoon, we get a call. They're like, hey, when can you do an interview? And I was like, I'm on my honeymoon. And they're like, it's totally fine. I have like a button up with palm trees on it. And I was like, hey, I can't dress formal. I'm not going to, be able to attend the interview the way you want me to. And they were like, no, it's totally fine. Have the interview the next day on the honeymoon. And the guy's like, hey, how fast can you be here to Virginia? And I look at Taylor. She's like, 30 days. And the guy's like, cool, I'll have the moving company at your apartment in the next like week. And so,
oh, wow.
Yeah, crazy quick.
So you guys met when you were stationed in Colorado.
Yes, sir.
And so then how old were you when you got married?
I was 25 when we got married.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And then, so you said you were in church, you were going to check in a kid. So you've got a kid.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So I've got a little 4-year-old named Pierce, and yeah, sorry, I totally glossed over that, but the meeting of my wife was a crazy story all on its own. Right. So
it sounds like she has some Christian upbringing, right?
Yeah, she does.
She's wanting to pray about it.
Yeah. So my wife was raised in a Christian household. I was not raised in a Christian household whatsoever. So it was something when she was like, I want to start going back to church. That's why I immediately went on the defense. And I was like, I don't know if that's something that I'm willing to dive into, and yes, my wife's a rock star for her, definitely in my life for a very good reason. So
when she was saying that, when she was initially bringing up, I want to start going to church, did you guys already have Pierce?
Yeah. So
okay. How old was he?
He was 1 and some change at this time.
I feel like that's usually a big, turning point in a lot of people's lives is when they have a kid.
Yeah.
And you've got, that was true for me and Carrie. It was like, we weren't in church, but after, we had a kid, and by the way, we were in Texas also. And so we're in Texas with a kid, and we're like, we should start going back to church. I just think that's it's like a wake up moment, probably just having a kid where it kind of like rattles you out of the lifestyle you've been in, and you start thinking like, okay, what path do I really want to be on? What path do I want my family to be on?
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to, God working in our lives, share a little bit about how I met my wife. So my wife and I actually we met on Tinder, right? And I go to this super long field exercise. And while I'm at the field exercise, I hurt my knee really bad, and they have to send me out of the field to the hospital. So I ended up actually meeting my wife in person by the most crazy series of events. I got sent out of the field. She's like, hey, do you want to hang out? I ended up taking my leg immobilizer off because I didn't want to seem like a nerd when I go to meet her. So I go meet her, and fast forward like a couple of years, we struggled through deployment and stuff like that, had our breakups. And then the last time we were getting back together, we kind of sat down and we're like, hey, this time is like with the intention of getting married.
Yeah.
I don't want to like play around, not beating around the bush whatsoever. So a month later, we found out she was pregnant with Pierce. And I'm sure the military, if you're a single dude, does not pay you well enough to take care of a woman and a child. So,
right.
I immediately, started getting everything in order, and I came back because I was in Virginia when I found out she was pregnant. I was on leave. She had flown out there to meet my family. And the whole time she was there, we were joking around. I was like telling everyone she was pregnant. And she didn't know she was pregnant. I didn't know she was pregnant. I was joking around like, hey, I can tell I know she's pregnant. And she calls me when she gets back to Colorado, and she's like, hey, the pregnancy test was positive. And I was like, what are you? And I immediately started like short circuiting, start trying to, I'm like trying to submit paperwork to the Army that I don't even have yet. I'm like, we got to do something, because based off of like how I grew up and like the dysfunctionality of my family, I wanted to, and always made it a point to not ever like have my son experience that dysfunctionality, and yeah. I made that decision long before I met my wife, before I met Pierce. I was like, my kid is not going to, the drugs, the alcohol, none of that is going to be cool. None of that is going to be acceptable. None of that's going to be, a thing that you'll experience, but not a thing that's going to be commonplace. And so the first step was getting married. And, I went and asked my wife's dad for her hand in marriage and everything, and tried to do everything as traditional as I could, given the circumstances that, we were already given. We got married, got married 9 months later, 8 months later, little dude was born. Got out of the military 2 months after little dude was born. We packed him up and drove 12 hours to Flagstaff, Arizona, where I was going to school. That was my next big thing. That was my next big play. And while I was at school, I was still struggling, like in and out, getting too drunk and playing way too many video games and stuff like that. And I was still present, I was playing with him and hanging out with him and stuff, but it wasn't like, I wasn't being intentional with my time with my son or with Taylor. And that's something that I think God like kind of picked me up out of Arizona and placed me in Texas. And he's like, now that you're separated from these things, gave me an opportunity to, I guess, like you said, that eye-opening moment where I'm like, oh, holy crap, I have a kid and a wife that I need to not only provide for, but like be there for and love and cherish. And, and that's something that I think Freedom Church instilled in me and like helped me start to change my life for like the much greater good. I was like still kind of struggling with the time spending and whatnot when we first got to Texas. And after we started going to church, everything just seemed to get easier. I started to understand things like with Taylor and with Pierce a lot easier. Like I was engaging in more meaningful conversation with Taylor, and we're talking about the Bible and we're praying and we're doing all these things that I was like, totally, I thought against beforehand. And then this one move to Texas, this one church for 4 months dramatically changed the way that I saw like everything, right? So I relocate up here. We find Virginia Hills pretty shortly after we relocate. And we just, every conversation I have, it's almost like it's geared towards me becoming the person that I want to be and like helping me figure out why exactly I was doing those things to myself when I was younger. Like after my dad had passed away, why was I drinking? Why was I, chasing girls around? Why was I doing all this stuff? And it all became very clear to me that it was a lack of pursuing Christ versus the other vices that I had in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. When we don't have Christ in our life, we will fill that gap. We will fill that void with all kinds of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And you see this a lot when people go all into a different thing, and it's not going to fulfill them. It's not going to last. It's like what they need, but you
Right.
have to wait till they figure it out on their own. So one of the things I'm curious about is, tell us, how's your mom doing now? And when you left that house,
Mm-hmm.
right, that was so unhealthy of an environment, what happened to her? What happened to the rest of your family? Did they get out, or did they stay stuck?
So my mom now, rock star. She's got a great job. She's constantly getting praises and promotions and stuff like that. So she's doing the thing. She lives out in West Virginia with my little sisters, who also have kick butt jobs, and they're doing their thing. So everybody's collectively, and my brother is out in West Virginia. He's got his own remodeling thing going on. So everyone
That's awesome.
has since made it out,
Great.
I think at that particular point in time, like right after that house, everyone was kind of stuck for a little bit, and stuck in the same things. Like I would get calls when I was in the military from like my brother and stuff, and he would be intoxicated, and it wasn't a big thing then because I was also probably intoxicated when he was calling me. So it's like we'll share some like drunken laughs and whatnot. And I got a couple calls about like my mom's health and some stuff that she had going on that really, didn't make me feel too hot being out there in Colorado. But I also understood that like, hey, this is something that I 100% needed for myself. I needed to like separate myself, not just from like my friends and family. And it was the environment. I needed completely out of like where I was at so that I could, grow the way I needed to grow.
Man, that's incredible. I'm just curious, what's your brother's name?
Dante.
Okay.
Dante Baker. Yes, sir.
That's interesting to me because, so your mom gave you the name Isaiah, which is such a biblical name. And they weren't going to church. How did they come up with Isaiah for you?
So my
family name?
No, my biological father, in and out of jail as he was always reading the Bible while he was in jail. And that's kind of how it happened. I think.
That's interesting.
Well, actually, no, now that I'm sitting here thinking about it, given the time frame, it couldn't have been that. So I guess my biological father at some point in time would have had some sort of religious background. I don't know a whole lot about him, so that makes me curious as well.
Yeah, because your story is one where you wouldn't think you would have the name Isaiah, but it also shows that it was always there.
Yeah,
right. It was always there. It was a seed planted early on, and it might have taken a while, and you had a lot of twists and turns and toxic environments that you were in, but I think you're good evidence that people can't use their environment or their upbringing as an excuse, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've done a tremendous 180 with your life and built a family, and now raising your son in a way that's totally different from how you were raised.
Right.
I'm curious, because you grew up in a home where drinking and drugs were so prevalent, do you drink socially at all, or have you had to have no part of it? What role does that play with you now?
So I can go out with just the other day, my wife had like a real estate event, and there's like an open bar and stuff like that. Right. Totally cool. I'm not like biting at the bit or anything like that, or I can have a beer or a drink or a beer. It's not like something where I used to, if I even smelled alcohol, I was black and like there was no in between for me, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's not like that whatsoever. I don't feel that like that tug, you know, and that's something that I thank God for all the time. I don't feel that like pulling back into those crazy habits.
That's great. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you found the freedom. It sounds
Yeah,
like
yeah, certainly.
that's fantastic. So how old's Pierce now?
Pierce is 4.
All right.
Yeah.
Any others?
No.
We'll leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah. Well, my wife and I, the church service before last, we just had a gentleman come in and talk about adopting and fostering and everything. So my wife and I got all the information that we could from that. And that's something that we're going to start to look into over the next 6 months because I'll be finishing school by January and everything. So I think that's at least we think that's where the Lord's calling us. After we left the service, we're both sitting there and like I started to get a little teary eyed during the service and I look over and she's getting teary eyed and we sit down in the car and she gets on a phone call and as soon as she hangs up, there's like this moment of silence and I was like, so do you want to talk about this? She's like, yeah, I think that's like what the Lord's calling us to do. So,
wow, man, your story's not even in the middle yet. You're not even to the middle of your story. And I know that seems crazy for you to hear because you're like, I've gone through so much, but you're still extremely young too, right? And God's got enormous plans ahead for you and your family. I have no doubt about that. You look at the situation that you've been called out of, and a lot of men like yourself serve as that transitional figure, that pivotal role in your lineage, right? If you look at what you came from and what you were handed, and then you look at what you are handing down, it's like everything changes with you. You take all the bad and you're saying it stops here, and you're going to put your family on a new path,
right.
And that's an awesome thing. So I can't wait to hear more of your story, you know, in 10, 15 years and see where things are going. We've adopted, and if you haven't checked out our adoption podcast, just came out a couple of weeks ago, check that out. I think adoption is a miracle if you feel called to do it. But man, that's incredible. When you think back to yourself at your most pivotal moments in your life, those big milestone moments when you were 17, 18, 19, what would you say to yourself now if you could go back and be there at those moments and have a moment to talk to that younger version of you? What would you say?
I think I'd grab myself on the shoulders, give me a good look in the eye, and tell myself that no amount of drugs, alcohol, women, no matter what it is that you're chasing, nothing is going to fill that void in your heart like a relationship with Jesus Christ could.
Man, I think that's a mic drop right there. There's nothing anybody could say better than that. So you found Men's Alliance, or Men's Alliance found you.
Yes, sir.
Just a few months ago, back at the beginning of this summer. I would just love to hear what's your impressions. How's that been going? What do you think about it? Good, bad, ugly so far?
Man, I think Men's Alliance has been one of the I won't just say the coolest, right? And I'm not trying to blow smoke here. I think it's been like one of the most needed things I've experienced in a significant amount of time. You know, because my wife and I started our walk with Christ around the same time, you know, so we're growing and we're understanding things at different but similar paces. But there's certain things that I don't talk to my wife as well about. I don't speak to my wife as well about. There's certain things that, you know, I'm totally okay with being vulnerable with my wife because I think that's important. But with certain things, I think it's something that I like to, you know, carry that burden myself. And Men's Alliance gives me that chance to just unload whatever burden I'm carrying that I don't want to share with my wife, and share it with a bunch of dudes who are probably doing the same thing, and get some like really valuable insight. So I think it's like, and we're getting a banger of a workout in around a fire and sharing Jesus afterwards. Like it's just, it's been fantastic. It's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm always puzzled when I can't imagine Men's Alliance not being for a guy, right? It's like, I mean, in my mind, I know, okay, it's not for everybody, but in my heart, I'm like, how can you not want to work out in a devotion, right? We all need both. But you said something that's really key. I think so many men say, "Oh, my wife is my best friend. Oh, I married my best friend," and I know that sounds really sweet and romantic, but I'm always thinking that's an awful lot of weight for her to carry.
Right?
Is the wife hat weighs enough without asking her to also wear the best friend hat?
Right.
And like you said, all that stuff that we need to unload, we don't need to dump it all on her.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We always feel so much better after we say everything, right? We're like, oh, it feels so good to get that off my chest. Felt 1,000 pounds lighter. Yeah, but you just dropped the 1,000 pounds on her. And sometimes it's better, like you said, take it to the fire and drop those 1,000-pound burdens on a group of dudes that you don't have to be married to.
Absolutely. Well, I think so. There's something very valuable too about having a bunch of guys who might be going through the same thing, and it's that you get a very unbiased, point of view. It's like, hey, we're all talking about these things and we're all discussing these things. How can we as a collective get better at dealing with these things? If I say something to Taylor or we have a particular discussion, like you just said, if I unload all of that on her, now she's thinking about everything that she is going through, as well as the things that she now knows I'm going through. So I find it very important to not bottle it up, but I could put it in a little briefcase and carry it to the fire with me and discuss that with the dudes. Cause you get a totally different perspective on it as well. It's like, yeah, I'm going through this too. It means a lot more when, I'm talking to a guy who is married and raising his children in the church and doing things the way that I want to be doing things, right? So it gives me an opportunity to hear it from another Christian man's perspective versus obviously the things that I was chasing before, which were not
That's right.
the right answer.
That's right. When you say it to another man, you're going to get a man's perspective and feedback, especially, when you're talking with older guys around the fire, guys who have more experience and have been through more than us. We get that man's perspective back, and it comes back pretty harsh usually, because that's how we tend to talk. And sometimes I think that's why some men don't want male friendships and would prefer to hang out with women and prefer to just share it all with a wife because, well, they're not going to kick you in the butt.
Yeah.
That you need. Yeah. Right.
Certainly.
So that's probably a part of it.
Absolutely.
Well, man, I tell you what, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. Man, I'm just excited to see what you have ahead of you and what God's got for you. Where you've come from and where you are now is a good indicator of the direction you're moving, and it's a great one. So, guys, if you're listening to this, I think that your takeaway from this, mine for sure, is one of encouragement, because it shows that, like, no matter what you've been through, no matter what you're going through, no matter what your past was, you don't have to continue that direction. You can totally change. And just like how I love hearing, like, everybody in your family is out of that house now. They're all different places. They're all working great jobs and clean. And man, that's a surprise. Not every story has that great of an ending. And I know you guys have been through an awful lot, and it's not as easy perhaps as it sounds, but I think you're giving a lot of people hope here. I know we got a lot of men going through some tough times, and it's just good to hear from a guy who's gone through it and has come out the other side.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
All right, man. I look forward to seeing you at the next All Tribes too.
Oh, yes, sir. Sounds good.
And give my greetings to the bros up there at Revenant Tribe.
We'll do. Yeah, we'll do.
All
We
right.
should be on the call this Friday. Tomorrow. We'll be on.
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Have a good one, Goose.
All right. Good day. To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.